No. Of course, I've tried lots of different experiments, but what I came to realize, one of the things I'm very interested in, is the context, is the cultural connection that an artist has, and in this case a composer has, with people around him or herself. And that means that when you're making a piece of music, then it has to be made, I think, with the idea in mind that you're communicating something. And I thought about this a lot, and I've come to believe at this point in my life that the role of an artist is to observe and absorb, not to judge, but to observe and absorb everything around oneself. And then through some sort of intuitive and associative process that you can't ever quite understand, you have to feel your way forward to coming up with something that's some kind of an expression about all of that in a way that connects things, maybe shows parallels, points up similarities or differences that hadn't been there before, and in some way invite a dialogue about who we are and put that back out there and hopefully get some feedback. Someone either throwing something at you or maybe clapping once in a while. But I think that it's important for artists to be connected, to be an integral part of the culture that they're part of. So again, part of what I'm doing, and I think it comes from my very populist background as a rock musician. I'm not sure if it does. That's how I say it.
One of the things that touched me the most in some of our conversations over the last several months is that connection that you spoke of, and how you consider the audience when you're writing something. I think a lot of composers don't ever do that. And I was really struck. Can you talk just a little bit more about that subject, about what you think of the audience when you're writing?
Well, it's an ongoing question. How do you, you can say that you want to be involved and you want to be connected. Probably most people would say they want it to be, but what does that mean? And what is, if you want to be connected to culture, what the culture that you're part of, what is that culture? Well, it's not monolithic, it's not one thing, it's incredibly varied. And so that requires, for me, a continuous process of trying to understand who I am and what part of the culture might I have a chance of having a dialogue with, and how can I create work that invites some kind of a conversation. So it gets expressed in various ways. I think you can be part of many different audiences. Who is the audience? And in academic circles, people like to say that that you're sort of making music or looking down to the audience or something. Or what's the word they used? Sort of dumbing down your music to make it for the masses. I don't see it that way at all. I think the audience is intelligent, and that it's important to find ways of inviting that conversation, and that the audience has to be part of that conversation. So that means that I don't judge things, so I try to listen to everything. I've been listening lately to Kanye West, who's a rap artist, and I like some of his stuff. I don't necessarily understand it all. I've been listening to Britney Spears lately. And these are people that classical people love to hate. But it seems to me that if there's a lot of people that are out there responding to this music, despite the fact that it's made for the most crass and commercial reasons at some level, but if people are responding to it, it's probably resonating in some way with something that has some value for them. And as an artist, it's important for me to try to get to that understanding so that I can feed it through my own set of connections and put something back out there.
When we first started talking about this project, it was focused on the Earl Stanley Gardner Mystery Weekend that we had here in Temecula. And so when we were first speaking, you didn't know too much about this person, Earl Stanley Gardner. I was amazed within a few short weeks. You suddenly had done so much research and had dug into it so much. I think you became one of the most expert people on the subject of anybody probably on this planet.
I don't think so.
But it was
a gross exaggeration.
well, I don't know. I was just amazed. At
Thank
how
goodness for
much-
Wikipedia.
how much you had absorbed in a short amount of time, and all the information that you had. Learning that about this character, in the conversations we had, was struck also by how some of the characteristics of Earl Stanley Gardner and his spirit and his lifestyle and the way he lived and some of the things that were important to him, what that meant to you and how that kind of took form and shape in the music that you wrote for this evening.
Well, I mean, I don't understand the piece of music I wrote this evening in many ways. I mean, you can't. One has to trust the process, trust that you're going for something, that you have to feel your way forward, and trust that you're trying to pull something into being that doesn't exist before, and maybe later you can understand part of it. One of the things I discovered once I started looking into Earl Stanley Gardner, because I didn't know anything about him. I didn't even know his name. But the first thing I found out was that he created this character called Perry Mason, who had a TV show based on him, and it was one that was playing in my house when I was a kid. It was always on, and I didn't remember anything, or not very much about the show. I remembered the theme song. So I started looking into who this character was, and the more I looked into it, at first I thought, well, it's this TV character from the 60s, I don't know, a detective guy, what does that mean? But I found that the Earl Stanley Gardner character was actually very carefully made and made in a lot of ways that resonated with my own search, some of the things I've already been talking to you about. He was very interested, Gardner was very interested in creating stories that were entertaining. He was trying to sell a product, he was selling books. He was the most prolific author in this country. He wrote like 600 novels. But yet, it wasn't just about selling lots of books. He was very, very concerned that there was a subtext, that there were many subtexts in his works that talked to things that had to do with real values. He was very concerned with democracy. He was very concerned with the balance that was required to keep a democracy running. He was very concerned with the role of the individual in taking on and being proactive in keeping the kind of balance that's required to keep governments in check. And so the Perry Mason character, very much a part of commercial television, but was imbued with this idea that you have to go out there. He wasn't a fancy Hollywood lawyer driving around in a Jaguar with a hot chick on his side. He was this guy who was always taking on the underdog and always looking for an interesting way to look at a situation which might be considered hopeless. And it was based on Gardner's own career. He was for 18 years a criminal lawyer. And he got to know the vagaries of the criminal justice system very well from his own experience. And so he was very concerned when the Perry Mason character became a television creature. He fought constantly with the folks in Hollywood to make sure that there was this sense of integrity going on underneath it all the time. So this is something I really liked very much. Another thing that Gardner did when he was further along his career and he was very wealthy, living out in the desert, writing these novels about a guy who lives in a big city. But one of the things he did was he formed a thing called the Court of Last Resort, and that is the second movement of my piece that we're going to play tonight. And that was a group of people who were legal, who had some kind of legal, very, very high legal credentials, and were wealthy. They didn't need to be making money. And he decided he needed to put together a volunteer group of people to take on the cases. This is back in the 1950s, long before computers, long before the internet. To look for the cases of people that ended up in prison for various reasons, because they were at the wrong place at the wrong time, they were the wrong color. There was a DA who had to get something solved to make themselves look good for whatever reason, and they sought out cases all over the country, and they did this work for 10 years, and they brought it to the public, and they published the results every week in a magazine to show the public and get the public involved with what needs to happen to keep things going. So I find these things to be very admirable in this guy, and it's a way for me, a model of what an artist should be doing. In other words, creating something that is possibly entertaining, that reaches an audience that people want to read, but also has something that invites a dialogue, and a very dynamic dialogue about who we are as a culture.